Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, or I hope you all had a good one because now it's Monday. And welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. I do actually have a couple of things to talk about this week, which is unusual, as long as I can remember what they are, because normally I have nothing to talk about and I just make all this stuff up as I go along. But first, today's video, proudly sponsored by Manscaped. You can get the Manscaped 4.0 Performer Package today with 20% off and free shipping when you go to manscaped.com/themightyjingles, plus 2 free gifts when you use the promo code JINGLES at checkout. The package includes the Lawnmower 4.0 Body Trimmer, which can be used on body hair anywhere on your body, the Weed Whacker Nose and Ear Hair Trimmer, the Crop Preserver Post-Shower Deodorant for your family jewels, and last but by no means least, the Crop Preserver, which, no, you can't eat it. Well, you probably could, it's not toxic, but you probably shouldn't either, so never work with children or animals. Let's try that one again. And last but not least, the Crop Reviver, to quickly spray on and refresh the areas that need it the most. The Lawnmower is a cordless, rechargeable and waterproof trimmer, which means you can actually use it in the shower and say goodbye to all that mess on the bathroom floor. And because it has ceramic blades, you can actually use it with confidence in the more delicate of areas. And remember kids, always dispose of the leftovers responsibly. Out of all of the products in this kit, I think the Crop Reviver spray is probably the one that I like the most. It's one of those things that I didn't actually know that I needed until I tried it. You spray it on and wave goodbye to sweaty balls, and honestly it feels way better than it probably has any legal right to. And did we mention that if you use code JINGLES at checkout, you get 2 free gifts, including the Manscaped Chafing Protection Boxer Briefs, available in a size of your choosing, obviously. And they really are very comfortable. Oh, and nobody saw that, right? And the other free gift is the Shed, the Manscaped leather travel bag. Waterproof, very durable. All of this can be yours at 20% off with free international shipping if you head over to manscaped.com/themightyjingles and use code JINGLES at checkout. Or just click the link in the video description. So anyway, first thing I wanted to talk about this week, and it's to do with a really interesting and very funny statistic that I heard earlier on in the week. And it's to do with charity fundraising, specifically extreme sports for charity fundraising. Because when you're raising money for charity, it tends to generate a bit more interest if you're doing something, other than running 5 miles. So, extreme sports like abseiling, bungee jumping, parachuting. Yes, parachuting. So, here in the UK, we have this thing called the National Health Service, which, I know it's not free healthcare, it's funded through your taxes, but effectively, as far as the end user is concerned, it's free healthcare. I mean, when I was in hospital recently for cancer surgery, nobody presented me with a bill for £60,000 and asked me how I'd like to pay. And a lot of people will do. I mean, aside from also being funded through our taxes, the National Health Service does get a lot of money from charitable donations, and a lot of people will do charity fundraising things for the National Health Service. And one of the things that people will do is skydiving. You get a lot of first-time skydivers who actually take up the sport because they're raising money for the National Health Service. So, here's the thing. Now, skydiving is not something that I would ever do, right? Because that's just way too scary for me. I mean, you're in a perfectly good aircraft. There's nothing wrong with it. It isn't crashing. Why would you want to jump out of it? Abseiling, that's another thing. When I was in training in the Navy, we did some adventure training. And they took us down to the Devon coast. And there was this abseiling rig that we were all encouraged to have a go of. I actually got myself hooked up to the rig, and I got right to the edge of this sheer 150-foot cliff, looked down and thought, nah, look, there's a path here. I'll take the path down. It seems a lot safer. So, nope, sorry, not doing it. Although, which is weird, because I used to do, when a ship's boarding team, we would rapid rope out of helicopters onto contacts of interest, and I loved that. That was great. In fact, as the radio operator, I was the first one out. Wasn't such a huge fan of the training required to qualify for rapid roping for the ship's boarding team. I mean, the actual sliding down a rope training was easy, it was simple. they'd give you like welder's gloves, big thick suede leather gloves, and you would just slide down the rope with these gloves on so you wouldn't burn your hands. It was fantastic, great fun. But to insert via a helicopter, you had to be what they call dunker trained. Yeah. There's this facility at, I think it's at Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton, or it used to be. I don't know if it still is, probably. I mean, why would they build another one? It's expensive. Basically, they've got a swimming pool, and they've got a mock-up of a helicopter cab suspended from the ceiling of the swimming pool. And you all have to get into this helicopter, and they drop it into the pool. And then you've got to, it's to train you to not panic in the event of a helicopter crashing into the ocean. So you have to get out in a specific order, and you have to wait your turn. So, that's the tricky part. Actually, that's the easy part. The tricky part is when they do it again, and this time, instead of just dropping the cab into the water, they drop it into the water and then they flip it upside down. So now you're strapped into your seat, hanging from what is now the ceiling of the helicopter cab, waiting your turn to get out. And that can get quite emotional. And then just when you've mastered that... Oh, and by the way, if anybody panics, everybody has to do it again, right? And then the third time they do it, it's exactly the same. They drop it into the water, they spin it 180 degrees, so it's upside down, and then it rocks around for about 5 or 6 seconds. So you have to wait until all violent motion ceases, and then take your turn getting out one after the other. And just when you think, okay, it can't possibly get any worse than that, they do it a fourth and final time, and it's the same as the third time, except this time they turn the lights out, and you're doing it in pitch darkness. Well, I did it the first time, and that qualifies you for helicopter insertion for 2 years. And then when it came time to re-qualify, I was like, nope, I am not doing that again. Screw that. But anyway, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, skydiving, parachuting for charity fundraising for the National Health Service. So anyway, the statistic that I heard, because a lot of the time when people do this to raise money for the National Health Service, they've never done it before. And that's kind of the point. They're doing something extreme and challenging. I mean, if you parachuted for a living, nobody would be very impressed that you were doing it to raise money for charity. And this is where all of the injuries occur. Because if you're going to hurt yourself when you're skydiving, aside from a parachute malfunction, which tends to be fatal, it's people who see the ground rushing up for the first time, and they just completely panic and freeze and forget their training. And that's when they hurt themselves, broken ankles, broken legs, and so on and so on. So it turns out, you can probably see this coming, that for every £1 that people raise for the National Health Service by throwing themselves out of perfectly good aircraft, it costs the National Health Service £13 to treat all of the injuries from people throwing themselves out of perfectly good aircraft in order to raise money for the National Health Service. So I'm sure, they're very grateful for your efforts, but if you could please stop skydiving to raise money for the National Health Service, you would actually be raising money for the National Health Service. And I think that's hilarious. Well, in actual gaming news this week, there's this zero-G PvP shooter on Steam in early access. I'd never actually heard of it until I saw this article on the PC Gamer News website. It's called Boundary. Now, it did really, really well for an early access title. It was released just over a year ago, so like June 2023-ish, something like that. And it shifted 100,000 copies in its first day. Despite being priced at $25 for an early access title, which is fairly pricey for early access, but it still shifted 100,000 copies, and it received thousands of mostly positive reviews on Steam. So it got off to a fantastic start for an early access title. I mean, there aren't many aside from Star Citizen, not many early access titles that can boast a better start than that. And the developers said that they expected early access to last 6 months to a year. So it's been just about a year. The game's being abandoned. Why it's being abandoned, however, is what's interesting, because you've got the publisher blaming the developer and the developer blaming the publisher. So the publisher made an announcement. And the publisher, by the way, are Skystone Games. You might not have heard of them, but they were founded 4 years ago by a guy called David Brevik, who was one of the creators of Diablo and used to be the president of Blizzard North. So their announcement read, "After careful consideration, Skystone has decided to relinquish the publishing rights for Boundary effective at the end of June. Over the past few months there have been significant delays and a noticeable absence of content updates for Boundary. Despite our best efforts and support, the developer has been unable to deliver the necessary updates and improvements to..." I'll summarise this for you. What happens when a game's in early access and it has a publisher and a developer? All of that early access money, the $25 that hundreds of thousands of people paid, that goes to the publisher, and then the publisher pays the developer to update and continue to develop the game. And the publisher's saying that the developers have stopped doing that and have stopped doing it for a couple of months. So the publishers have kept up their end of the deal, but the developers have basically stopped. So they're washing their hands of the whole thing. They're relinquishing their rights to the game, which means it now belongs to the developer again, but the publishers are the ones with all of the development money, not the developers, which effectively means that the game is basically shit-canned. The developer, however, has a slightly different take on what's just happened. They said, and I'm quoting, "The unilateral decision of the publisher to stop operating the game is extremely sudden and unreasonable for the studio and players. We immediately negotiated with the publisher upon receiving their notice, but unfortunately we were unable to change their unilateral decision to stop operating the game. In response to the current situation, the studio is striving to regain the rights related to the operation of Boundary," that's the game, "and is making every effort to preserve the account data, creating conditions as much as possible for the subsequent relaunch." Hang on a minute. The publisher's saying, well, one thing is clear, since the publisher have walked away from the game and they're the ones with the development money, this effectively means that for the moment at least the game's been cancelled. But the publisher's saying they've returned the rights to the developer, and the developer's saying they're still in negotiations with the publisher to get the rights back. So this is all as clear as mud. But it's in the next part of the developer's statement where we get some kind of idea of what has actually happened here. They went on to say, "At the same time, the studio is continuously striving for the income that the game deserves so far through negotiation and legal means, because so far the studio has not been able to recover the income it deserves from the publisher." Ah, right. So, again, to summarise this, the publisher took all of the early access money and stopped paying the developer. So, in order to get paid, the developer either stopped updating the game or refused to share the updates with the publisher, which means for the last couple of months no updates have been published. So when the publisher's saying the developers have stopped working on the game and there haven't been any updates for a few months, they're not lying. So we got another one of those occasions where a publisher is saying something that is 100% factually correct, except possibly the part about them returning the rights for the game to the developer. That bit is still, well, anybody's guess. But it's what they're not saying. They're not saying, yeah, we decided to stop paying the developer, as a result of which the developer said, fine, if you're not paying us, we'll stop working until you do start to pay us. At which point the publisher said, well, right, then we're out of here, and oh, by the way, we're keeping the money. So the developers have said that, I mean, the game is going to be suspended in slightly less than a week, but they do intend to continue developing the game. They just need to find some money to do it from somewhere. Understandably, the hundreds of thousands of people who put $25 into this early access title are a bit upset, which has led to the game being review bombed on Steam, although that seems kind of counterproductive. I mean, the publisher have already walked away. They don't care about the reviews anymore. And a lot of the people who paid the $25 to buy into the early access for the game are now demanding refunds. Unfortunately, that's the risk you take when you put money into an early access title, isn't it? There's never any guarantee that an early access title will ever actually be published. And this one certainly isn't, not with the publisher walking away with all the money. Even if you have a successful launch, which this game did, and even if you attract a big audience, which this game did, if it's early access, that's just the risk you take. While we're on the subject being simply developing a good game with a large audience that reviews well is absolutely no guarantee that it's ever going to get published these days, it's time for another episode of dumb shit that games executives have said this week. This time it's the turn of Microsoft, more specifically Xbox. So you may be aware that earlier this year Microsoft announced the closure of 4 major studios all on the same day. One of them was the Tokyo-based studio Tango Gameworks. Now, they were founded in 2010, so 14 years ago, by industry legend Shinji Mikami, who I had actually never heard of, but it turns out this guy was actually best known for creating Resident Evil. They also developed the very, very good Evil Within games, some of which I actually attempted to play, but they were way too scary and I gave up and chickened out halfway through. Most recently, they released a sort of rhythm beat-em-up game called Hi-Fi Rush, which also did extremely well. In fact, Xbox executive Aaron Greenberg called the launch of Hi-Fi Rush a breakout hit for us and our players in all key measurements and expectations. We couldn't be happier with what the team at Tango Gameworks delivered with this surprise release. And then they shut the studio. So naturally, a number of people were kind of curious to know, well, why? I mean, Tango Gameworks have never done anything but release successful games. Why would you shut them down? So this question has been posed to various different Xbox suits, none of which appear to be capable of giving a straight answer. President of Xbox, Sarah Bond, was asked in an interview in May about the closure and spent about an entire minute doing her level best to say absolutely nothing. CEO of Microsoft Gaming, Phil Spencer, gave a frankly baffling response to the same question. When asked why he just shit-canned a whole bunch of these teams, he responded by saying, "It's all about doing the right thing for the individuals on the team. It's not about my PR, it's not about Xbox PR, it's about those teams." So in his mind, doing the right thing for the individuals on those teams is making them all unemployed. The bizarre thing here is that, well, there are studios. Let's use BioWare as an example because they're perfect. Remember, BioWare's publisher is Electronic Arts, and they are notorious for shutting down successful studios without any good reason. But BioWare are still limping along for some reason, despite being owned by Electronic Arts and not having published anything that could even be reasonably described as good in 10 years, since Dragon's Age Inquisition in 2014. Everything that BioWare have done since Dragon Age Inquisition has either been cancelled or it's been complete dog shit. Warhammer Online, Wrath of Heroes, never published, cancelled. Command & Conquer Generals 2, never published, cancelled. Shadow Realms, never published, cancelled. Mass Effect Andromeda, complete dog shit. Anthem, complete dog shit. And yet BioWare are still limping along. They still have jobs, they still have a publisher, but Tango Gameworks, gone, despite never having produced anything but hits. Hits that sell well and make money for their publisher. But apparently that's just not enough. So why is it that nobody in Xbox or Microsoft can give a straight answer when asked the question, why did you close them? Well, there was one interview with an Xbox executive called Matt Booty, and yep, that really is his name. And for most of the interview, he gave the fairly standard, typical kind of non-answers that basically everybody at Xbox and Microsoft have so far given when asked this question. But then he did let slip one fairly important and possibly significant tidbit of information. You recall I said that Tango Gameworks was founded by Shinji Mikami, the creator of Resident Evil? Booty said, there are a lot of things that go into success for a game. You know, what leadership do you have? What creative leadership do you have? Is the team the same team that shipped something successful previously? And we have to look at all of those things together and then ask ourselves, are we set up for success going forward? And while there may have been factors and situations that previously led to success, they may not all still be in place as you look at what you're doing going forward. What he's referring to here is the departure of Shinji Mikami from Tango Gameworks last year in 2023. The thing is, when Mikami set this studio up, and remember, this is one of the greatest game directors in video gaming history, he set the studio up specifically to train new creators and guide their projects as the producer, not as the game director. Now, he directed their first game, The Evil Within, which did extremely well, but he hasn't actually served as game director within his company since 2014. He hasn't actually been a creative director at the company since The Evil Within went out, and they've put out 3 very successful games since then, under the creative direction not of Shinji Mikami, but of people that Shinji Mikami trained to be creative game directors. All very successfully, I might add. But now that Mikami is gone, remember, a guy who hasn't actually created a game in his own studio in 10 years, during which time they have produced 3 very successful games, but now Microsoft no longer have any confidence in the creative direction of the studio that Mikami created. And so they've been shit-canned. And BioWare continue to limp along despite not having published anything that wasn't complete dog shit in 12 years. You realise what this means, right? Because I'm not sure everybody gets the implications here, but this means that we all now live in a world where Electronic Arts are a better publisher to work for than Microsoft. What the yeah, I've got nothing. And on that bombshell, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope it's given you something to think about, and I hope you've enjoyed it, because we are done. As always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.